Hello, church, and welcome to another virtual daily devotion. We're glad that you're joining in with us today. As this week we talk about remembrance. Some of you will remember this moment well because some of you were with me as the church went to Israel 2 years ago and the Holy Land in 2019 to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. And we had toured many of the really powerful biblical sites, the Sea of Galilee, Caesarea Philippi. We went to the site of Mount Gilead, and we saw the Mount of the Beatitudes and all those kinds of things where Jesus was believed to have given the Sermon on the Mount, place where Jesus was crucified. But something that wasn't on the tour that I hadn't planned out. Our group had gone and we had went to the house of Caiaphas, where they believed that Jesus was tried before the Sanhedrin and sentenced and then taken to Pontius Pilate. And in that courtyard, there's a statue with Peter and a rooster and his denial. And it was eerie because we were there midday, and sure enough, I didn't know, I said, somebody with the tour company must have said, cue the rooster, because as we're standing there in the courtyard, the rooster's crowing. And so this very vivid memory of Peter's denial of even knowing Jesus. But then our tour guide took us to a place we hadn't talked about, and he took us up the hill in Jerusalem, overlooking the city, to this little Jewish graveyard. And he came to a grave, above ground grave, and all along the top of the grave were stones, all these different shaped stones, hundreds of them. And as he stood there, he started talking to us about Oskar Schindler. If you've seen Schindler's List, you've seen Steven Spielberg's take on Oskar Schindler. But Oskar Schindler was a German machinist, industrialist. He owned some factories, particularly in Poland, around Krakow. Oskar Schindler had served in the German army in the late 1930s. He was an intelligence officer. He spied for Germany on Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic today, for rail and waterways, on how they could, roll into there and take Czechoslovakia over and annex it into German motherland. And he was part of the Nazi Party. But as the Night of Broken Glass happened, and as Hitler's intent for Jews and gypsies and anybody who didn't agree with his party line, and Jews began disappearing, and whispers of concentration camps and clear executions in the street. And as the rhetoric amped up, Schindler knew that something about his affiliations had been deeply wrong. And so he began to compose a list and pay the local Nazis, several of them who he served with, bribes, increasingly more expensive bribes, to hide, to ferry out eventually 1,200 of the Jews who worked for him in his factories. At the end of the war, nearing 1945, when it was clear what was going on in Auschwitz and Dachau, Schindler actually moved his entire factory further east into what is today the Czech Republic to avoid, because at that point the Nazis were getting desperate, to avoid these people being killed. Schindler wasn't a Jew. He was a Christian person. And there was that moment when his Christian faith intersected everything that Hitler was saying, and that more and more people, good people, were starting to become and allow as permissible. And so Schindler very courageously began to a great personal risk to himself and his own family, save these Jewish people, men, women, and children, whole families at times. And in the Jewish tradition, you'll see it every time, Jacob, Abraham, the Jewish people as they cross the Jordan in the Promised Land, they build altars of stones. And each of those stones was a visible Hebrew Bible Old Testament reminder of a God moment, of how God had stepped into, through human agency or through the divine alone, and had spoken to them as people. And so we stood there and just were marveling at in the center of this Jewish cemetery, by his request, this man who at one time had been part of a movement and party that was so ugly and bigoted towards Jewish people, wanted to exterminate them from the face of the earth. He said, if the authorities in Jerusalem allow, it would be an honor for me to be buried amongst these people. And all around him were the graves of the men, women, and children he had saved. Schindler went bankrupt, left Germany, and what put food and bread on his table were the Jewish families who remembered how he had stuck out his neck in bravery and paid his bills, paid for his food and his mortgage on many occasions. That memory went two ways. What a powerful thing it is when the world seems harsh or unkind to remember, to do good, when others would say, do whatever. What a powerful memory it is to speak truth and honesty when everybody else says, whatever goes is all right. What a powerful thing it is to stand alone, to do the right thing, even when so many around you seem to be going with a flow that is disturbing. And as Schindler and many in the confessing church did, many of them losing their own lives for paying witness to what they believed to be their Christian calling as what is right, even as other Christians were doing something very different. And so as our small group gathered around that tomb, I just wept. And the contrast between Peter's denial and Schindler's initial denial, and Peter's grace-filled, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Feed my lambs, feed my sheep. And at the end of Peter's life, when he's about to be killed, they're about to crucify him, as the tradition in church goes, and he says, they're gonna crucify him. He says, no, hang me from the cross upside down, because I'm not worthy to die as my Lord did. And the parallel of Schindler, now he's not tortured on a cross, but saying, of all the horrible things I was a part of, I tried to do the right thing, and if you'll allow me the grace, bury me with those I was able to save. There's so many more I couldn't. So as you go on your walk today, or as you're out in the woods, as you're starting to get out from the stay at home, maybe find a rock and place it somewhere quietly in the woods or by a stream or in your front lawn. And remember, who are those people in your lives that have made all the God moments, that have reflected that grace, and that reminded you that there's a power so much greater in this world that holds you and calls you by name. May we remember. Amen.